HR Unboxed with Natalie and Faye.
Welcome to HR Unboxed. It's episode 2, once again joined by the lovely Natalie from Rebox HR. Hello.
Hi.
And we've got Faye with us as well. How are you doing today?
Not too bad, thank you. Happy to be back.
Nice to have you both back. And episode 2 we're calling an avalanche of employment law. Why is that?
It's for 2 reasons. So since our first episode, and firstly, I just want to say thank you to everyone who's tuned in. There's been so many people that have engaged with us and are asking us their HR questions and things like that. And that's exactly the response that we wanted. So having a cup of tea and a chat with HR isn't so bad after all. So thanks to everyone who's tuned in. And the reason that we've called it an avalanche of employment law, because obviously we've had a change in government since our previous episode, and with that brings a lot of changes that are going to impact how we operate and work as businesses. So it's going to be interesting, but we've combined it with an avalanche because Faye and I successfully climbed Mount Snowdon for charity at the weekend. So yeah, lots of exciting things.
Lots to talk about. And yes, we've had fantastic numbers of people listening to the podcast and watching it as well. So thank you very much for tuning in. And of course, we'll let you know later on in the podcast how you can get in touch if anything that we're talking about kind of makes you think of some questions, or you've got any comments or anything that you'd like to talk to us about. So do get in touch, because this is definitely a two-way conversation. So tell me more about your mountaineering exploits. This sounds very exciting.
So I think originally it was something that was on my bucket list, be honest. It's on my vision board since last February. And I broached it to Natalie and said, how do you feel about walking up a mountain with me? Now, the response initially was like, are you sure? But what we done with that is we created it more for a charity aspect than we did just something that we wanted to do as a hobby. So Natalie said, we're going to do this for the Frenches, for the love of Frenches. So Floof is the charity that we walked for. So we're both French Bulldog owners, and we just found it quite fitting to do something to give back to charity for the rescue dogs. It's something that's quite close to our hearts, something quite personal to us, but it then allowed us to do it, as Team Rebox, up a mountain. I mean, what's more fitting than that?
It was quite a challenge. It's certainly not for the faint-hearted, and I was like, exactly as Faye put it, am I sure? And I was thinking that all the way up that mountain. The conditions were really treacherous, actually. We were very lucky to have a really good guide. If you guys are thinking and listening going, oh gosh, I could do Snowdonia, make sure you get a guide if it's your first time doing it, because it is incredibly challenging, and to have that local knowledge and safety aspect as well was really important for us.
So do they have like little Welsh Sherpas that take you up and they know the best paths and everything?
I wish we could say that they did, but his name was David and he came from Cambridge, so you couldn't have got further from Wales. But he was fantastic, and the team at Walk Snowdonia, I hope they don't mind us giving them a mention, were fantastic, as well as we stayed at a place called the Alpine Guest Lodge, and they were smashing hosts. So thanks for welcoming us so lovely, Wales. We didn't really want to leave, but the actual conditions and getting up the mountain itself was such a challenge, and people think it's just going to be a nice little walk. It really was not. It took us about 4 hours and 20 minutes to get to the summit, and it is so busy, but people don't realise it. Obviously it's quite rugged, so there's a lot of footfall there in terms of stones are not in place and things like that. It's not just a walk in the park.
Well, this is what I found, because I climbed it when I was at school, and there's a lot of loose gravel and stones, and it's very steep, and I did slip over and slide down the mountain a few times, and it was quite scary, and the teachers said they thought I was a goner. And I was bouncing down, and I kind of developed like a third buttock with this huge bruise at the top of my thigh, and that became my nickname. It was actually on my birthday as well, so it could have been on my gravestone. But
out of anybody though, Chris, it could only happen to you, couldn't it? Really?
It's my 15th birthday, but it was an amazing experience. But it's I mean, people don't take it seriously because it's in the UK, and you think, well, we don't really have proper mountains here, but it is, and people have come into real difficulty on Snowdonia when the weather turns. So it's a very brave thing to do. And also, it's getting down again. It's hard enough getting up the hill. Sometimes it's harder trying to get down the hill without slipping, that was actually when I fell down, because your legs give way and you just end up on your bottom because it's so steep.
Yeah, but there was a couple of people, wasn't there, that fell, and because it was raining so heavy, on our way up, it was like there was a river coming towards us, so we were very much, our boots were logged in water, and there were people walking up in there in their trainers. And we're like, oh gosh, at least we prepared for the conditions, but there was a lot, and on the way back your body's facing a completely different direction, so it was quite a challenge. But I think for us, doing it together as a team was what helped us overcome the challenge, if that makes sense. So it was a wonderful experience to do together.
So obviously working together as a team does make a big difference when you're doing a challenge like that. And what would you say you've learned about teamwork from going through that experience?
I was going to say, so this is what aligned to what we could bring out of it for the experience itself. So yes, it was our own personal challenges. You know, it was by no mean feat that we got up and down, because I'll be honest, I did underestimate. I saw it as quite just a large hill. Like, what's this? 29,206 steps later, I can tell you it is not a hill. It is a mountain, but we were in a lovely group of people. So I think there was approximately 10 of us, inclusive of the guide. And it was, you know, from the get-go, we all said we go up the mountain together, we come down together, and walked to know what that looked like on the way. And there were situations. We had one of our group members turn back and go back down before we just got past the tarmac, and said, actually, this isn't for me. And that's fine, because you have to take what your body, what you feel the capabilities are.
Was that a surprise? Was that somebody that you would have thought would have been fine with it? Because sometimes the people that you don't imagine would struggle are the ones that really do, because they take it for granted a bit.
Yeah, I think, you know, she did kind of give over her concerns initially starting the walk, but I did kind of think we'd all get up together and come back down together, but just obviously wasn't the case. But yeah, I mean, she tried it, and that's the biggest thing, right? So she's put herself forward, had a go. If it isn't for her medically, physical ability, then that's her own prerogative. But I think the fact that she even come out and attempted it, kudos to her.
I mean, the fact she got halfway up the mountain is, you know, she was trying. Clearly, it's not like she kind of, you know, had a look at it and were like, oh god, no, that's really high, you know, I don't fancy that.
No, that was us the day before.
Yeah. But I think, you know, this comes back, and I did a little piece about this on LinkedIn and some social media about comfort zones. You know, going forth with challenges, giving yourself that personal challenge. And people think, yeah, but you were just walking, but you can apply this to other things, because if I've done this on this particular occasion, I can do it again with something else. So continually want to, you know, kind of give myself them personal challenges, but how then we can apply that into maybe a workspace, see how collectively teams can come together to help push forward and achieve them goals. And I think that's something big that we've taken away from this.
Yeah. Well, nothing good comes out of staying in your comfort zone. You don't learn, you don't develop and grow. And for me, this was a complete I was a fish out of water, complete experience, because I'm from London. We don't have mountains in London. We have the mountains of people on the tube, but that's the closest to it that we get to it. And when we are, there were times when I found it really challenging, and I said to Faye, I don't think I can go much further. Our visibility was so poor, we could barely see our hands in front of our faces. So I was very much reliant on her to get me through that process.
What was the weather like? Was it really foggy and drizzly, or?
It started with quite fine rain, but as we slowly started, just after we got past the tarmac, wasn't it, the heavens absolutely opened, and that's where the rivers on the stones came from. And then it was very much just mist and fog, so even when we got to the summit, we couldn't see anything either side of the drops.
That's such a shame, because it's a great view up there.
Yeah.
You'll have to go back another time.
Yeah. We'll have to do it again, as you do.
But it is harder when it's raining as well, because your clothes are heavier, because you've got all the water to carry up the mountain as well.
Yeah, definitely. But we learnt a lot by working together as a team. So Faye has seen absolutely everything. Running a business is very much like a mountain. You have really good days and then you've got really misty days. So Faye has seen what that looks like from an employee's perspective, but also how I go through things in a business owner's capacity. So it's really important that when we're working together with teams is that we understand each other's strengths and capabilities, because where I fall short, Faye will be that person saying, right, just 20 steps more, then we do some breathing, 20 steps more, we do some breathing.
Yeah.
And you can really apply that to how you work, because you know the work's always going to be there. So to be able to work together and collectively achieve something either at work or on top of a mountain, you know, it's all relative.
I think also when you go through something like that with a colleague, you get to know them as a real person in a way that you don't in an office, because when you're suffering and you're going through an ordeal, you don't have any pretenses, you don't have any kind of masks and layers on. You are literally yourself, and you really get to know each other properly in that kind of situation, don't you?
Yeah, and we did hear some HR phrases up the mountain. So there was a large group of colleagues that were walking up for Cancer Research UK. They all had matching t-shirts on. They looked absolutely brilliant. They didn't look frazzled at all, and this was about halfway, wasn't it? And they said this one chap who was slightly behind, just taking some water, he said, if you leave me alone on the mountain, I'm reporting you to HR on Monday. So we can't even escape it up a mountain, unfortunately.
You could have said, it's all right, I'm right here, literally next to you.
We were tempted, but we didn't. So.
Fantastic. And how did you get on with the fundraising then? You said you'd raised a decent amount of money.
Yeah, we raised £650 for the love of our Frenchies, or Floof as they shorten themselves to, and they're over the moon. So yeah, the more we can do to help people and utilise our platforms and our little challenges, we will do.
And what does the charity do for the dogs? Does it, what does it actually do for the French Bulldogs?
So they rescue them in emergency situations, mostly. So it could be that somebody's being evicted. It could be that they just don't have the capabilities to look after the dog if their life has changed. So my rescue dog came from Floof, and she was unfortunately not as well looked after as what she could have been. So we were initially going to foster her, but she was a classic foster fail, and we had 4 wonderful years with her. So we got to do the walk in memory of Molly and Faye's rescue dog Dora.
Oh, that's lovely. And when you get to the top of the mountain, you can put a stone on the pile of stones, I think. It's probably quite a big pile by now. I don't know how they avoid that falling down and creating an avalanche. But yeah, you kind of remember your dog at that moment as well, can't you?
Yeah, it was really nice, and lots of people collectively doing them for different things.
Yeah.
I found that really fascinating. So yeah, it was nice to come together.
Yeah, well done. That's a great achievement. Okay, now we mentioned before about the HR avalanche and all of the changes, and we were saying about the new Labour government being imposed. What are some of the things that people might notice start to feel a little bit different at work?
It's going to feel very different for employees as well as employers. So the 2 major changes that we are getting the most queries on, I mean, there's 60, as in 60 proposed changes. It's the most we've seen in over 2 decades.
And have they announced this when they did the King's speech, I guess, when they came into power? They said, right, here's a list of things that we're going to suddenly start changing.
Pretty much. So there's an emphasis on what they want to call as more stabilised work. So the main areas that are likely to be affected are things like 0-hour contracts. They're looking to ban those altogether, which is quite a shift, especially amongst university students who look for flexible hours. But from an employer's perspective, you've got people like the hospitality industry, the care sector, and of course, the NHS as well. All of these sorts of environments are very much reliant upon those contracts, but they've pretty much tarnished them all with one brush and said, well, actually, they are, these are people that are easily taken advantage of, so therefore we do not wish for these contracts to continue. And King Charles was very clear about that in his speech, was about stabilising and future-proofing work for everybody. So yeah, that's going to be one of the biggest changes we will see.
And what's the sort of time frame for that? How quickly are they going to bring this legislation in? Do we know?
The proposals, so the way that new law comes in, because a lot of people will be listening to this saying, oh, new law just happens. It doesn't. It has to go through several stages before we get there. So the first part is the proposal stage, which is the bit we are seeing now. So those 60 proposed changes will then go to Parliament, and then Parliament will then essentially vote on what should be prioritised and how soon that will then become law. Once that's all approved, it goes to the King for royal assent. So once it's granted royal assent, we will then see the changes in approximately 8 to 12 months from that point. So it's actually quite quick, considering when usually, I think the biggest change we've had in recent years to employment law was the change in data protection, which was in 2018. So, or known as GDPR for those that are eagerly listening. So yeah, that's incredibly, it was an incredible overhaul, but now this is something completely different because it's affecting a lot of family friendly policies, and Faye's going to go into that in a little bit. But we do have so much that we have to prepare businesses for, because they can't be expected to know everything, whereas we have to know these things to be able to give the advice and make sure they stay compliant.
So at that point that it gets approved, then the clock starts ticking and you know that your business has to be compliant within, say, 9 months or 12 months. I guess it's important to hit the ground running and be ready before that moment, so you know what you're going to need to do and you can just snap into action.
Yeah. So a lot of what Faye and I do is around preparing for all of these things. Now, because it has been so much of a priority that the King's mentioned it in the opening of Parliament on the 17th of July, we're now in that position where we know what is likely to happen. So we've already begun our preparations, and Faye and I have been delivering updated employment law workshops to all of our clients and as many small businesses as we can, so that they can be informed and that it doesn't seem so daunting when it happens, because often we get clients go, well, I didn't know that changed. We're like, no, because we've kept you compliant with it. You are compliant, we assure you. But there are people that just go, oh, crikey, I don't know how to approach this conversation with an employee because, well, I don't know the law, and that's what they have us for.
Absolutely. And I think now that it's out in public, there's going to be a lot of people that are worried about their jobs and thinking, what's going to happen to my contracts? I'm on a 0 hours contract. Is that going to be possible for me to be changed onto a different kind of contract, or am I going to lose all of the benefits of that?
There are worries on both sides. So unfortunately, we've had some clients come forward and say there's so many things that are likely to change, and they're already under a lot of pressure. Perhaps they're still recovering from COVID, for example. Some businesses, we have to be mindful, still haven't recovered from that financially. And we're in a cost of living crisis as well. So employees are naturally going to be worried about it as well. And they do want equal, what the fair pay. A lot of people are looking for pay increases because the cost of living is impacting them. So we've got a no-win situation here. So some clients have said, Natalie, unfortunately, we need to downsize our businesses because we're not sure on if we're going to survive, and we don't want to create any more uncertainty for our employees. And then you've got, like you said, with the student community, well, actually the flexible hours and working in a bar or in a bookstore or things like that, they're all, it's flexible for them. And I think they've very much gone upon the premise of a few years ago we saw the whole overhaul of Sports Direct, didn't we, that they're exploitative contracts and they don't pay their people fairly, And I think they've gone in with that mentality and straight away don't realise that actually this works for a lot of people, especially new mothers or returning mothers to work or working parents, you know, dads that are having, you know, single dads that are trying to get their get everything together. So it's really hard for people because they don't see what the benefit of that is. And just because people use 0-hour contracts, it doesn't make them a bad employer. It's how they treat their people that really matters.
Is this also going to impact people that do just a little bit of work with maybe Deliveroo or Just Eat or these kind of micro tasking apps you can get where you just go and do a mystery shop somewhere and you get £2.50 or something? Everything is suddenly going to change, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to affect the gig economy, or what they call the gig economy, with the Deliveroo drivers and Uber drivers and so forth. And we've already seen employment tribunal cases being brought forward because they're working exclusively for those companies. And I think, again, this is where the negative connotation comes from, is that these people are used and abused, but actually it's really not. It's the whole situation is that it's how it's interpreted and it's how people are treated. And I always say to people, they won't remember what you've said, but they will remember how you made them feel. And that's what causes the majority of tribunals that we're seeing going through the system at the moment. But yeah, I do feel for people that may be listening to this and going, oh gosh, I'm really anxious about all of these changes, but you know, we'll navigate them together. We've had a change in government before, and we will see if this is going to work just in a different way.
Now, you mentioned about pay rises, and I think this is something that's very much in the news at the moment because the government's been approving a lot of pay deals. We heard just recently about the train drivers getting quite a big payout and the junior doctors as well. Is this going to put pressure on employers to boost the amount that they're paying their staff and kind of backdating pay rises to people that feel like they haven't been given a good deal?
I do feel that, yes, without a doubt, this is going to impact businesses throughout, because what we're seeing, just touching upon obviously what we were saying with the new pieces coming into play, the new legislation, potentially, I use that word potentially because there's so many bits of information readily available out there at the moment, but it's just to be sure that actually it hasn't passed into Parliament yet. So whilst we can do, you know, preparation is key here, so everything that we can do to prepare, we will. In terms of what that's actually going to look like, is it could be something a little bit different to what we first perceived it to be. Now, in terms of pay, I think we're also going to see uplifts in certain types of leave that aren't typically paid at the moment. So we have things like carers, parental, there's an unpaid time off that people can take for dependency and whatnot, but it might be with a view that going forward these become paid entitlements. So it's another hit on small businesses that are having to accommodate what that looks like. So it's whether businesses are looking to factor that in now for payroll going forward, to think, okay, if we have X amount of people that want dependency leave, want carers leave, want to implement such entitlements that they can and statutory allowed to, what is that going to look like for us being able to pay that out, basically?
Where does HR kind of fit into the dynamic between the employee and the employer? And in a typical situation, I guess you've got a member of staff saying, I want more money, the employer saying, can't afford to give you that much more money. Do you have to stay neutral, or are you on the side of the employer or the employee, or are you kind of somewhere in between? And is that quite a tricky kind of maze to navigate?
I mean, of course, yeah, it's tricky. I mean, you want to do best by everybody, and we're not in the remit of trying to take things away from people that quite clearly they need. And with cost of living crisis and other things going on, you know, people need a certain amount of pay, or they need to have certain entitlements just to function day to day. And that's nothing that employers have put on to an employee. That's what the government's done. And I'll be quite open in saying that, because what are they doing to help compensate small business support to allow that payment to be there for the employee, because their hands are tied too. So I think that's quite important to clarify that is a big factor in it. So I do think that when an employee is disgruntled or explains that they need a higher pay, or there's particular leave that's now paid that they want to decide to take, I think that's where then HR get involved to say, okay, what does that look like? What's the current market? what is that for your salary, what is that for your job, because we can do that, you know, we can kind of get an overall picture just to make sure everybody is at market standard, or just, you know, even if we have the conversation with the employer to say what does your payroll look like, we're not expecting them to share that with employees, we're not, you know, only people that are privy to that information obviously get it. But if we have an understanding, if the business is capable and if it's viable to do so, then of course we will encourage pay rises and benefits for employees, because, you know, it's the moral and it's the right thing to do.
I think there's a lot more awareness now of fairness
Yeah.
in terms of looking at people who are doing a similar job, and it might be people of different genders, it might
Yeah.
be people that have been working at the company for longer but they're at the same level of ability.
Mm-hmm.
What are the rules on paying one person more than another person, or does it have to be fair, or do you have to kind of create bans and stuff? How does that all work?
Yeah, so that is quite it's all very much a situation where we have to look at what the job role is and the responsibilities that are held within that role. Otherwise, that is such a vast question that we will be here literally the entire
That's a whole
podcast
episode.
breaking it down. And it's also very industry specific as well. And I think to add on to what Faye was saying in terms of commercial perspectives and what it means for businesses in terms of the financial aspect, most of the time people have this perception that business owners, they have a lot of money, or that they have big budgets to play with. What we have to remember when we're talking about small businesses is that they are subject to the same levels of taxation and corporation and VAT as the big players such as your Starbucks and Amazon and other distributors that may be available. So with that in mind, we have to be aware that the small businesses don't have access to that level of funding that the big corporates do. So when people are going to small business owners saying, look, I'd really like a pay rise, best believe that that business owner really does want to give that person a pay rise because they want to keep the best talent for their team. The problem is that actually they may not have the funding or the cash flow available to do it. And all it takes, I mean, I'm speaking from experience, all it takes is a couple of bad months, and you then have to prioritize what payments you make, and you know how you then balance what it is that you need versus what the employees need versus what the business needs. So they have to remember that there is this crossroads here that comes into it. But yes, you're right, people are very much aware of what they should be entitled to and what their pay rates are, and with the changes that are coming in with the legislation proposals are all around, actually there's going to be an increase to statutory payments, and that includes a proposal of statutory bereavement leave. Now we don't know what that looks like yet. Same with carers leave, they're looking at possibly making a payment for that, and we know the word statutory always has an association to pay, so we are going to be seeing something change around that. I really wish I knew more about the proposals at this stage, but the issue is that a lot of people say, well, businesses can claim that back from the government if it's a statutory payment. You could, well over a decade ago. However, they took that ability and put that onto the businesses. So if you look at payments such as statutory maternity, statutory sick, if you have someone go off sick for the full 28 weeks, you're looking at around 3,800 during that time, in line with the current rates. For one employee, for one small business, you can imagine the impact that has. Whereas if you're working for a large scale corporate, it's a bit of a drop in the ocean. Oh, actually, it might even be a drop of pay for them. But with small businesses, you notice when one of the cogs isn't there, and it has an impact on everyone, not just the team or the department. It's for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, it can be really hard to replace somebody with a temporary member of staff, and you still have to pay them because they're on maternity leave or parental leave.
Yep.
I actually thought you already got bereavement entitlement. Is that just something that most companies do because they're being compassionate and they don't have to?
So there is a difference between all the different types of leave, which is again one of the things that we myth bust all the time, and that is around so compassionate leave and bereavement leave are two very different things. Compassionate leave is if you have a situation where, I mean, unfortunately, we've had people that have experienced miscarriages. There are people that have then had to undertake bereavement leave because they've lost a relative. So, you can use compassionate leave for extended family, so aunts, uncles and wider
family circles. But bereavement leave is if you've lost someone very close to you, such as normally it's immediate family, your mum, dad, grandfather, grandmother, those people, or siblings. And so we're looking at different changes with that. So at the moment it's discretionary for employers to do that. So most of our clients will pay bereavement leave because they don't feel that person should be left without just because they've lost someone, and they shouldn't miss out on that. It's hard enough time as it is without having to worry about the financial aspect of things. So there's a lot of compassionate employers out there that do want to do right by their people and support them in the right way. So this news may be welcomed by some employers, but then it's a case of, well, actually, how does it work in practice, and what are the rules around it, and are there any anomalies to that we then have to factor in to how we develop our policies, practices and procedures.
It's going to be very complicated, and this is the thing, when you get used to things being a certain way and then everything changes, suddenly you're out of your comfort zone, and this is where you need advice, because you just think, I don't have the bandwidth in my head to learn all of this extra legislation, all of these changes. I've got enough to worry about running my business. So yes, I can see why people would want your help with this stuff.
There's so many different types, especially when we've got family friendly leave, and we've seen obviously the huge changes in flexible working and hybrid working and people working from home now. So employers are tearing their hair out saying, oh my gosh, how do we manage all of this? And that's exactly why they have Faye and I to help them. Yeah.
And the other interesting thing is, when me and my wife were having parental leave, is you can have what's called staying in touch days. So you can work from home or go into the office during your parental leave, and that's okay. That doesn't count as you ending your parental leave. And it's good if you want to, if there's something really important at work that you don't want to miss out on, or you kind of, when you're off, you do feel anxious that everything's going to go to pot because you're not there to look after your job, and you're going to have more work to do when you get back sometimes.
Yeah, well, Faye knows this better than anyone. I mean, Faye's got 3 children, and how she juggles everything, I have absolutely no idea. I've only got a French Bulldog and a husband to look after. So when we are talking about family-friendly leave, just as long as people are logging it correctly so that people are being entitled to what they should be getting, that's the first important thing, is that people are actually being logged correctly, because some variations of leave have payments attached to them and others don't. So we need to be very mindful of that when we're working with people. So we ask a lot of questions when we speak to people, when we speak to our clients, and if people generally ask us, like, how on earth have you managed to how have you taken that leave and how have you spaced it out, because what you have to remember is there's so much to juggle as a parent. And honestly, hats off to all of them for the work that they do. Plus, they then have to juggle a family and run a household. People don't realise actually how many hours that takes on. And Faye is getting ready for her daughter to go back to her second year of secondary school, and the kit list is huge.
Oh no.
And expensive. Just to add that in, expensive.
This is the worst time though, school holidays, because suddenly you've got a choice: pay even more or have your children following you around. And I had my little boy with me for about 3 weeks, and I kind of realized it was too much when I was trying to get him onto the roof to install a transmitter aerial, and they were like, you can't have 3-year-olds on the roof. I was like, it'll be fine. So we're on to our case of the podcast now. So if people have been getting in touch with their HR dilemmas, and we've chosen a really good one. So do you want to talk us through this person's dilemma?
Okay, so this is actually a case that Faye and I, we couldn't, there were some cases that just really stand out, and this is one of them. So this is a case of a head chef who was working in a hotel in the Lake District, so there are worse places to work. However, it was what we could only describe as banter that's got out of hand. And whilst we didn't manage this particular case, it's very widely known around the employment tribunal stuff. So when we come onto the podcast, these are the sorts of things that we're going to be talking about going forward case-wise. And people ask us all the time, is it okay to have banter in the workplace?
And Faye and I will either have one or two reactions. We'll either sit back and hold our breath, or they will then start alluding to something and we'll put our head in our hands.
Do they start bantering with you and you're like, stop this?
To be honest with you, there isn't anything that Faye and I haven't seen or heard, to be honest. So there's nothing people can say or do that will shock us, which sounds quite a lot, but it is. Managing people is a lot, especially when they are you're dealing with all these different personalities, different backgrounds, and they're all clustered together in a workplace. And what some people find funny, they may tolerate for a period of time, but then it stops becoming funny. And this is very much this case. So the award for this particular tribunal was £80,000, which is eye-watering.
What?
And it's not, a lot of people think, oh, you just go to tribunal and you get awarded money and things like that. But there is actually a lot of work that goes into tribunal cases. Now, Faye and I spend our time keeping employers out of tribunal, not putting them in it. So we can obviously see where this has started to go wrong. So the story goes that there was a head chef and a general manager at this hotel. The general manager started being, shall we say, highly inappropriate and sang a famous song by Victoria Wood. So
right, I've realised which one.
There you go.
The one about the hostess trolley.
I believe so, but it's honestly, I will be honest, Chris, it's before my time. So I wasn't allowed to watch Victoria Wood when I was growing up because, the 9 p.m. watershed. But there was this very much inappropriate song and gestures that accompanied the song towards this head chef, when, bless him, all he was probably trying to do was to get some of his work done and do the preparations for dinner time, rather than be serenaded inappropriately by his general manager, who was also a male, by the way. So they had the chap did say, look, I don't think it's appropriate, can you just stop? Because it was borderline harassment by that point, but it got worse, and it was very much like this guy felt like he had no choice. So he then brought a claim to the employment tribunal, saying that his employer didn't do enough to protect him at work, and didn't educate the employees about sexual harassment in the workplace. And of course that legislation changes towards the end of this year as well. So employers really do need to be mindful of what they see as harmless banter in the workplace. And if you speak to any employment solicitor, they'll just go, no. If you mention the word banter, it's just a flat no. And it just makes HR come across a little bit more like the fun police. So it's a difficult balance.
This is interesting because my perception of inappropriateness in the workplace would be someone of the opposite sex saying something inappropriate that makes them uncomfortable. Where it's two blokes singing to each other a song that's been on BBC One, probably after 9 o'clock. Not especially offensive song, but it is about sex. I would have thought that would be a bit of a grey area rather than definitely sexual harassment, because he's not sexually harassing the other guy, he's just singing something that makes the other person feel uncomfortable.
A lot of people think sexual harassment automatically touching. That's pretty much what people think, and it's not. The majority of sexual harassment cases, and Faye and I deal with a lot of them. So this year so far, so we are in August now, if you're listening a little bit behind, we're recording this in August, and up until this point Faye and I have received 18 calls around sexual harassment in the workplace. Now 16 of those are women towards men, not men towards women, which is what we see plastered all over the news. And I think it's being mindful, but I think because it may be a woman towards a man, it's not taken as seriously, where actually it absolutely should be taken that seriously. And Faye and I sometimes sit there going, oh, did we just take that call? And we look at each other and we run through it and we work together, but then we have to put the things in place so to prevent that sort of treatment going forward. A lot of that is through training mechanisms. Faye and I are booked with lots of training on sexual harassment in the workplace over the next few months, purely because there are boundaries, and people at first just think it's a bit of fun, and it's all a bit of fun until it's not. And that is the key turning point for people that employers and employees just don't see.
And I think also because people get away with it a lot of the time, and then it normalizes it, and then the point comes where enough is enough, or they try it with a different person who's less tolerant. Suddenly, you know, that's a rude awakening to something that you shouldn't be doing in the first place.
Yeah, I think this comes back to, I think, what you mentioned before about, you know, a workplace is full of a lot of people that probably usually wouldn't come together if they're not all in the workplace, right? So people have got different levels of, I'll call it banter. They've got different senses of humour, some dry senses of humour, things that are appropriate with their friendship group outside of work, but then they come into the workplace because they haven't changed as a person. So they assume that level of jokes, banter, or whatever they want to talk about is then accepted by then their peers in that same space. So they could think, okay, you know, other people around say, oh, that's just a bit of flirting, you know, and if somebody says, oh, I don't really like that, and then it's dropped. But the thing here is you've got potentially two employees that are in the midst of creating this sexual harassment piece, but then what that means for the employer, if they don't do something to mitigate what that looks like and prevent sexual harassment in the workplace, then that carries a 25% uplift on compensation if they don't put the proper things in place. So it is with advice when we're advising employers, we just don't go there, because you need to mitigate and have all these things in place to stop your team bringing that to any part that could be constituted as sexual harassment in the workplace. It could happen still. You could have the you know, the measures in place, but you have to identify that. You have to be able to produce that as evidence if it went that far, excuse me, to kind of show what you have done. So the worker protection piece that's come into play is that, you know, there's a legal duty on employers to be able to prevent this, because employees should come to a space where they are safe, free from intimidation, discrimination, and all the rest of it to get on with their job. They don't want Joe Blogs coming in of a morning and potentially making remarks to them. You know, we've got to talk about what's appropriate in the workplace. So we, as standard, just say, let's not do that. Yeah. It's a no.
Yeah. So we're not being the fun police, we promise. It's there to protect you as a business, but it's also there to protect the employees. Because if you're doing right by the right processes and procedures, you're doing right by your people. And that's pretty much the stance that we have. So when we come back to what we were talking about earlier, it's all about balance. So we don't work solely on behalf of, you know, in our capacity, we work on behalf of the employer because they're the ones coming to us for help. We then have to make sure that we're doing right by the employee from a procedural perspective. So it's all about balance. And when you're dealing with different characters and personalities that are combined in this melting pot of the workplace, you then find that, you know, people will be okay with certain things until they're not okay with certain things. So that's why we're like, no, education is the biggest piece that we can bring here.
And I think you've got to take responsibility as an employer to set those boundaries in your workplace and to create that culture where it's not okay to make people feel uncomfortable. And these are the consequences of not putting the processes in place rather than the banter itself. The banter is the byproduct of the way that you run your business.
Yeah, absolutely. And having those expectations set out from day one is so important. Now, the interesting part about the sexual harassment in the workplace rules that are coming in is that actually an emphasis upon third-party harassment. So these are people that aren't employed by the business, but you still have a duty of care to protect those employees from being exposed to said harassment. And, you know, we use the example of possible consultants that are coming in. You need to make sure that they're in line with the expectations. So a lot of our clients already are using a disclaimer saying, you know, these are our expectations. We're a respectful work environment. We have a zero tolerance approach to sexual harassment in the workplace, and then they get that person to sign it before they even step foot on site.
And I think also customers, if you imagine people that work behind a bar, I bet there's an awful lot of inappropriate banter there. And as, you know, the landlord, I guess you have a responsibility to make sure you're not putting your employees in a position where they're subjected to that.
Yeah, absolutely. There are no workplaces that are exempt, and you know, we're seeing quite a few cases of we'll call them private membership clubs in London that are now starting to come into the tribunal system, where people have been touched inappropriately without consent, because of the nature of the work that they do, which is never okay. So people do have a right to feel safe and feel protected whilst they're at work, and not take it as part of the job, as it has been explained to some people. And we're starting to see quite a lot of whistleblowing cases as well coming from those areas. So it's a very interesting dynamic with the employment space at the moment, because there is just so much to deal with.
Yeah, what a minefield. That's the company you wouldn't want to have to work for. Okay, well, thank you so much. Once again, another great episode. And if people would like to get in touch with their HR dilemmas or their questions or any response to what we've been talking about today, please leave that in the comments and get in touch. The details are on the podcast page, and we'd love to hear from you for the next episode. But thank you very much for your time, ladies.
Yeah, thank you.
And we'll see you on the next episode.